It was up to something season for me this weekend, if you can't tell. That blank wall that's been behind me for the last 11 episodes, it's not there no more. We got some character behind me, baby. A little bit of flair. Check out the credential collage. I think it's fine. Y'all think it's fine? It is. Shout out to my girlfriend Mary and my mom for helping make that happen. Pretty sick. Woo! It's good to be back for another week of Carroll's Cadence, especially as the season for Florida is just 10 sleeps away at this point. August 21st is today. August 31st is Florida football. Let's talk some ball, y'all. The oblong-shaped one. Florida held its final scrimmage of fall camp on Friday, and from what I've heard, there were a lot of things to take away, positive and negative. It was a period that was largely controlled by the defense. I saw some young talent step up again and continue to flash in showing that they can be contributors for the 2023 season, and presented a different aspect of the offense that we might not have seen last year that could be a large help in 2023. But before we get into all that, just make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 500 subscribers. Don't miss out on joining the Carroll's Cadence family. We'll always be around, but get in early while you can. Florida's second scrimmage of the fall came on Friday, and Billy Napier said on Saturday that the quality of football and competition aspects of the outing improved, took steps in the right direction. And I heard similar things from the people I've talked to, although there was some sloppiness that went along with it for both the offense and the defense. There are a few things that notably stood out, including the running backs' usage and production in the passing game. It's something that they didn't really do last year, but I think that there is a legitimate possibility that there's an uptick in both categories for Florida this season in their usage and production in the passing game. Young players continue to make waves on both sides of the ball, further illustrating the fact that true freshmen and redshirt freshmen will see the field this season and arguably have to see the field this season for Florida to exceed expectations. And most importantly, in my opinion, this defense took steps in the right direction towards reconciliation under Austin Armstrong in his scheme, as it showed the ability to create turnovers on Friday. But starting with the first one I named, Florida's backfield, Florida's running back tandem, and even more, in trio really, continues to kind of make strides to say they are accepting a larger responsibility in the 2023 season. They're set to shoulder a massive role for Florida in the upcoming campaign. And during the scrimmage, the unit flashed a new trait that rivals what we saw from the season a year ago. Because not only will this running back unit look to sustain its over 200 yards per game on the ground that we saw last season that was so successful. Just a dominant rushing attack from the Gators in 2022 that looked to carry over into 2023. We talked about it many times on here, but I've speculated the potential expansion of Florida's running backs in their roles in the passing game this upcoming season, just because of the offense, because of Graham Mertz being behind center. I think that helps kind of open up the air attack. And last year, backs weren't used consistently out of the backfield as pass catchers. The unit as a whole combined for 24 receptions, 160 yards, and 1 score a season ago. That accounts for just over 5% of the team's pass catching production in terms of yards and 12% of the team's overall receptions. And so I think in 2023, that will change drastically. I'll sit here and tell you it's going to change drastically. Florida's going to look to attack space in the short and intermediate levels of the field this season. And having the running backs involved in the passing game is one of the foremost ways, one of the top ways to do that. And that fact showed on Friday as sophomore back Trevor Etienne, Florida's star, rising star, made his presence felt with a receiving touchdown. And the change that Florida's going to see from this team this group, I should say, that largely has contributed via the ground game because of how run heavy Florida's offense is. The change that they're going to see will largely be dependent on Etienne, Montreal Johnson, especially after the tough loss from Cam Carroll during that scrimmage. Who, at this point, what we've seen is him being at Tulane, he has the most pass catching production of the entire bunch, and so he was expected to be asset, as a considerable asset to help get that aspect of the team up to speed. But with him injuring his knee, being out for the season, they're going to have to look elsewhere. And that comes with the bell cow duo that they have in Etienne and Johnson. And, they've both shown in smaller sample sizes that they're able to do it. Etienne had 9 receptions for 66 yards last year. Montrell Johnson had 12 for around 55, I believe, in a score. So they each have had success when they were used in the passing game. It just came at such a small rate. But and both have had success when they're used in the passing game. It just came at such a small rate, but they've shown they're more than capable to produce in that area, and they're going to have to be. It's complementary aspect to the offense, sure, but it's a necessity. It's part of what will make Florida tick this upcoming season. It's part of what will make Florida churn out yards, continue to keep the sticks moving, is attacking those short and intermediate spaces with the running backs. And Etienne's receiving score in the scrimmage, one of the few things he didn't do as a freshman in 2022, like I said, 9 receptions, 66 yards, but not a score, helps me prove that this team could be looking at I don't want to say drastic change because it's still going to be very run heavy, but at least higher usage of running backs in the passing game. Now, transitioning into the second point that was made very clear in my conversations about the scrimmage is we've talked multiple times, several times on this show in its 12 episode history about, young players, they're going to play and they're going to be a threat. They've kind of popped up as threats, as, spot takers, and they're making their names known in this fall camp. They continued to do it, and they look as if they're in a position to make their names known on Saturdays in the fall with the production they've put on the field. I remember when Dan Mullen was head coach and true and redshirt freshmen would really have to be the second coming of Bo Jackson before they saw the field in high volume. It feels like it's the opposite now. It feels like Napier expects his guys that he's recruiting out of high school to be ready to go day one, immediately. And if they're not ready to go day one, he at least expects them to be ready to go year one. We saw it last year with Shamar James starting in week 1 as linebacker, Trevor Etienne working in at rotation in the running back room, eventually taking over a lot of heavy workload in, tandem with Montrell Johnson, that TNT duo that we'll see this year. Etienne, Devin Moore, Chris McClellan, and several others saw considerable time. Miguel Mitchell came on late in the season. So there's a bunch of guys that, it's only going to help long term with having these young players in. But at the stage Florida's at now, with the caliber of talent they're bringing in, it's a massive boost for the team in the short term as well, and their short-term production. That isn't changing in 2023. And on Friday, we kind of saw, or at least I heard that they saw in that scrimmage, that continuing to take form. Because on offense specifically, the Gators are stacked with a trio of freshman wideouts who are going to see the field early and often in their careers. Andy Jean, kind of the savvy route runner of the group, earned praise in the spring. He was the main spring standout from this freshman offensively as a candidate to really take on an X receiver role, being that number 1 guy eventually in the offense. And he continues to look like he's going to fulfill a spot behind Caleb Douglas or whoever the Z wideout is on the opposite side. And then, you look at Aiden Mizell, guy's a burner. Guy can really just push, be a downfield threat for Florida when they do look to push the ball into the deep level of the field, even though I'm not sold that that's going to happen consistently this year. But when he does get on the field, he's going to be able to stretch it. And I do think that if they do target deep levels, Aiden Mizell is your guy. But as talented as both rookies are at this point, Eugene Wilson III, also known as Trey Wilson, has been the talk of camp since he arrived in Gainesville. He was a late enrollee at the University of Florida. But man, he has been a consistent talking point for the Gators so far this year, in this short year since he's arrived. And I've heard some people inside the building liken him to a former Florida great It's not often you're going to hear this name thrown around when you're trying to compare players, but they're saying he's the closest thing the Gators have had since Percy Harvin when he left campus, which is a massive compliment. That's high praise, but he's backing it up, working out of the slot. Wilson on Friday kind of ran this crosser slant type route over the middle, probably was in the 7 to 12 yard range. And he caught the ball working over the middle and took it the distance. Made a ton of players miss on his way to the end zone. Defenders were flying off of him, kind of shaking him in space, working out through arm tackles. I can't imagine how Austin Armstrong felt. Well, yes, I can. He was not happy, but just to see a guy torch a defense the way that Eugene Wilson has been able to do since he arrived on campus and then again on Friday, the potential for him to be lined up in the slot come snap one, week one, Utah Utes is increasing day by day. It is getting to be a higher probability that Eugene Wilson will be the starter out of the slot. They'll slide Ricky Pearsall to the outside spot with Caleb Douglas filling that other boundary receiver spot. And they'll go Ricky Pearsall, Eugene Wilson III, and Caleb Douglas in an 11 personnel, which they're going to probably run a lot this year because of how talented their wide receivers are. That is a very talented, obviously young, but talented group. It's going to be, there's an abundance of talent in that wide receiver room. And as a result, we could see the Eugene Wilson come in and start week one. We could see Andy Jean playing upwards of 30 snaps week one. We could see a heavy dose of 11 personnel, which hasn't really been the case, or at least the thought for Florida this year. Is more, okay, they're going to kind of ground and pound. 12 personnel is going to make an appearance more consistently. But because of how much talent is on the outside, I think it's hard for them not to place those wideouts on the field at the same time. You want to put your best 11 on the field, no matter what personnel that looks like. And Trey Wilson is making them have to consider playing him immediately because of how dominant that he's been since he stepped on campus. So look out for Trey Wilson. He's coming. But that's not even the whole story. It's not just Wilson. He's a microcosm of the unit in general. He's the embodiment of a larger movement of youth stepping into the Florida lineup. But he's not the only one. One of my favorites from the 2023 class, Jakeem Jackson, had a pick on Friday to continue asserting himself as a player who will crack the cornerback rotation. It is a 4-man rotation at this point with D.D. Johnson sitting on the outside, potentially having the ability to crack and make it a 5-man rotation as he continues to grow. But Jakeem Jackson has been a standout for Florida in the secondary. Obviously tall, long, athletic, physical, instinctual, all the traits you want in a cornerback one he has. And they all align with what Corey Raymond has just balled with developing since he worked at LSU nearly a decade ago, or began working there over a decade ago, I should say. So there's a good chance we'll see some of Jakeem Jackson early in his first collegiate campaign, and he'll continue to get snaps throughout the way. And then you have a sophomore like Devin Moore coming away with the pick. Seems like he's putting himself in a position to get back up to speed and be that potential second cornerback opposite Jason Marshall Jr. this year, with Jalen Kimber and Jakeem Jackson being the ones working in rotation. Jack Pyburn continues to make waves to suggest that he can take on a larger role in this defense, especially at F end, which is now without Justice Boone, who's the presumed starter at the spot. Arlis Boardingham and Tony Livingston, Arlis is a redshirt freshman, Livingston's gray shirt freshman, have impressed at tight end. They have been very stout, at least especially in the pass catching game, which is going to be important for Florida this year. Tyreek Sapp, although not young on the same scale, hasn't, he's seen a rotational role for Florida, but I do think there's possibility that he takes a step forward this season, at least in the usage that he receives, which he could find himself playing the largest role of his career because he's been destined to play on the inside more this year. But now with, like I said, Justice Boone going down, there is a need for more depth at F end. Sapp has experience playing that kind of strong side defensive end role. So that's how, he can operate. So he gets two spots where he can really kind of shoulder a load there, and he made several plays in the scrimmage. So just a lot of new faces wearing orange and blue are going to be coming to a field near you in 2023. A lot of new numbers are set to be called this year. And let me tell you, buckle up, folks. Ladies and fellas, don't get caught not knowing who's making plays when they make one. Learn who they are now. And then defensively, things are starting to come together for the Gators. It's showing in their ability to create turnovers specifically. I mentioned Jakeem Jackson and Devin Moore both having picks against opposing passers, but they weren't the only defenders to do so. And this next one is specifically an indication of the system as a whole, a greater step in the right direction. So Florida operates in a creeper defense, which a creeper defense basically means that you're sending 4 guys at all times, but you're just switching out which 4 you're sending. So instead of sending all 4 defensive linemen, because they have the F end, they have the 2 tackles, and then they have the jack. So instead of sending those 4, they're dropping 1 and sending a player from the 2nd or 3rd level to create a simulated pressure for opposing team. You're sending another guy from the same side and overloading a side to where it feels like for the opposing offense that there's a pressure coming when you're still dropping 7 back in coverage. You're still preparing for the pass, preparing to make a play and deny the ball without compromising what's happening in coverage, while also making it seem as if there's pressure coming to the quarterback's face. And Patrick Toney implemented this scheme last year, and it giving the unit its familiarity going into the second season. But the one that Armstrong deploys, it's very similar. We'll just see this specific tendency, this creeper aspect of it much more often. He's much more aggressive in the way that he sends these pressures. There's going to be 4 rushing the quarterback at all times. I am very interested to see how often it is that it's just the 4 down defensive linemen. I don't think it's going to come very often where it's just those 4, unless they're in a position where they can allow those 4 to rush. I think Florida's going to create a lot of pressure by bringing 2nd and 3rd levels defenders. But when you do that, that forces one of those down defensive linemen or edge players to drop back in coverage. It's a system Georgia's ran with great success under Kirby Smart. Obviously, they have the dudes to be able to do it. It's a complex system to learn, but it's one that once grasped is kind of free-flowing, get to the football style. And so if Florida has the dudes to do it, which they look like they're getting to that point where they do, they could well be on their way to a defensive resurgence in this upcoming season. And, kind of growing comfortable with this defense and playing within the nuances, Florida's naturally expected to improve. And it seems that, like I said, they're heading in that direction. So on Friday, Armstrong kind of called in a play to the defense that dropped the jack and sent another rusher from that 2nd or 3rd level. I'm not sure which one. Princely Umanmielen was actually the guy that they dropped back into coverage to replace the zone that the defender who was rushing would regularly be responsible for. And so not only did Umanmielen hold his ground, show that he can play in coverage, but he picked the ball off and cribbed that thing. He said, I'll take that. Took it to pay dirt. Yep. So to his time to go get himself 6. Time to head back to the cribbo. That's all you can ask for, right? If in this defense, in the way that Florida's trying to play, if your edge rushers are being able to drop back in coverage and make plays on the ball, create turnovers, understand that if they put themselves in that position, there's a potential while they're sitting in that zone that the quarterback might not give them that same respect that they normally give a cornerback, and he's able to jump a route or just be in the right position at the right time to catch a pick, flip the field, give them 6. Florida's in a great spot. And if that scenario isn't a direct example, if that doesn't directly correspond to what the Gators will attempt to do within this defense, really just create confusion from the 90,000 different looks that it'll present just, to opposing quarterbacks, what's really a basic principle, very basic in principle, I should say, then I don't know what is. If your edge rusher dropping back, being the legitimate coverage man that you want him to be while you're operating in this creeper style, then I don't know what could possibly be closer to illustrating what Florida wants to do this year. I don't. I don't think there's anything that I can sit here and say that is more Florida defense, that is more what they're trying to accomplish. So Umami Ellen skirting off on folks, that's a job well done by the Florida defense, no matter which way you shake it. That is peak Gators defense, peak Austin Armstrong scheme with the Jack making a play like that. So now the Gators are creating some reasons to be increasingly optimistic as they inch closer to week 1 in Utah. But there are some concerns as well. And it's not necessarily in the starting spots, but right now as UF approaches the season opener in Salt Lake, there's some kinks to work out at quarterback. And wait, don't turn it off yet, please. Hold on. I know. Don't flick off the video. This isn't about Graham Mertz. I'm not going to sit here and say Graham Mertz has anyone behind his back, anyone on his toes for this job. I think Graham Mertz is the head and shoulders starter of the Florida team in 2023. He earned that title on August 11th. I know, shocker. But for real, if you've watched this show, you've known that from the inception, from the time that he put pen to paper to transfer from Wisconsin to Florida, Graham Mertz was your guy. Graham Mertz was the one to make the assumption of the top spot this year. He was. But I'll tell you one thing. It's still quarterback controversy season in Gainesville. Yes, it is. And on Saturday, Billy Napier wrapped up fall camp with a press conference. He said, fall camp's in the books. We're moving on. Obviously, classes don't start till Wednesday, but we'll have a different focus on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And within that public address to Gator Nation, within that address to the media, Napier was asked about Jack Miller, who's been kind of dealing with some shoulder tightness, which has implications for the backup job come week 1. And Napier shared that Miller's actually dealing with some tendonitis in his throwing shoulder, and it's a very tricky injury to work back from because there are so many different timelines for tendonitis. It's something that really is just a feel process. It's not something that you're going to see too often with similar, having guys have similar timelines to recovery or similar paths to recovery. It's just like any injury, but tendonitis is magnified in that regard. And so you look at this and you say, okay, so as a result, Miller's potential week 1 status being in flux, the thought would be to place Mr. Max Brown, a phenomenon, really, a fan favorite at this point, as the backup, right? Like, yeah, that's 100%. Max Brown's going to step into that QB2 role for Florida this season. But that wasn't necessarily the case from Napier's perspective on Saturday. He actually looked at Micah Leon as a potential guy to assume that backup role if Florida got into some trouble early in the season without Jack Miller at the disposal. Because Jack Miller, while he has struggled to kind of earn his way into a starting spot, is still in a position where if Mertz went down early in the season, it was going to be Jack Miller, even though Max Brown has the potential to be that QB2 behind him because of the talent he brings to the field. Jack Miller was more than likely going to be that QB2 come week 1. But now with Miller out of the question, potentially, I don't want to say he's completely out. They say they expect him back in a few days. But like I said, tendonitis, very tricky situation to deal with there. With his status being in flux, Max Brown is not the lone guy at the top. Micah Leon has made some waves. And on Saturday, Napier said, first of all, the guy is an experienced player. He's played some football in the past. Micah is a guy that wanted to go to graduate school at the University of Florida, had aspirations considering coaching to some degree. So a guy that brought a lot to the room, And I think we are always looking for guys like him. Now, Micah has proved to be very effective. He's smart. He's a student of the game. Guy throws a really good ball. And man, these scrimmages, he just moves the ball right down the field every time. Micah has done a really good job, and we've given him some reps, and he's made the most of those reps. And listen, we all know that Max Brown is talented. He looks the part. He has a big arm. can use his legs better than any quarterback on the roster. He showed that he can be creative with his arm slots and just his ability to evade pressure and look downfield while performing as a prep level talent, even though he flew under the radar. And as a result, there's been a large hive of people clamoring not only for him to earn that QB2 role, but to actually challenge Mertz for the starting job this season throughout the spring and summer and even early portions of the fall. But there are still significant lapses with Brown in considering his inexperience, especially as he spent a significant portion of the offseason in the Gator baseball team's dugout. Like a team that went all the way to Omaha, a team that played the longest you can possibly play for a collegiate baseball team before eventually falling short to LSU. He was in that dugout. He was performing and playing a completely different sport. So as a result, we look at him in practice. We say, yeah, he has all the intangibles. He has the traits to be really good. But there's still little inexperienced things that still pop up every now and then. And namely, it's his timing. It's notably a second or two behind, a stride or two behind these other passers. In practice sessions, I've seen the ball jump off his hands, but most throws that he makes are a stride or two late. And in game, that window that he's making that throw, that having the hit his player, if he's a stride or two late, it might close up. It might, it's not going to be out at the time he expects it, which not necessarily means that the receiver won't be able to grab it, but it means that you might be leading him into a big hit. You might be pushing it to where this ball gets tipped now because it's a stride late, and that's resulting in the other team catching the ball and going the opposite direction. So with that, with just the lack of, his progression, and I because he's made a lot of strides, and I don't want to kind of overshadow what he's been able to do since he arrived on campus, but there's a legitimate concern with the recognition and reaction aspect of his game. It's yet to click. Everything clicks at a different time for players in college. Once you go from prep to college, sometimes it takes longer for guys to get things to click, and as a result, it's those things being yet to click puts Brown in a position where there is a competition behind Graham Mertz without Jack Miller in the fold. And don't get me wrong, if Miller's tendonitis lingers into the year, Brown will be slotted as the QB2 on the depth chart. He will. And he probably should be there. He should have opportunities for being on, getting on the field in certain packages when they want to use him as an asset to the rushing game. But if Mertz goes down week 1, week 2, and Napier has to look, he said, hey, who we got back there? Who we got being able to come in and prove some relief? I think there's a legitimate chance, a serious chance, that he would trot out, albeit a less talented, but more experienced Leon over Brown based on those comments. Not necessarily in-game experience, because Leon, while he has been in college for a long time, hasn't seen the field too often, but just experience of being a college-level quarterback. He's been in college longer than Max Brown's played the position. And from what I've seen myself, I can't necessarily blame Billy Napier for wanting to go in that direction. Thank you all for watching another rendition of Carroll's Cadence, a show dedicated to bringing you coverage of Florida Gators football, basketball, and recruiting from an unbiased perspective on this beautiful Monday. Like and subscribe right now if you haven't already. I hope to see everyone has a great week, and I will see you once again on this very app this upcoming Wednesday. For Carroll's Cadence, I'm Brandon Carroll, and I'm gone.